Hi again, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be looking at aorist passive participles. Now, just like with aorist active participles and aorist middle participles, if you've got a handle on those, then you know that putting participles together is really just a matter of taking some familiar pieces and slotting them together in a slightly new way. So every participle has a stem, it may have a tense marker, it's got a connecting vowel, a voice indicator, and then a case ending that looks like a noun. And we've seen all of this before. So lusantos, we have lu, which is the stem from luo, a sigma, which is the aorist, first aorist tense marker, an alpha connecting vowel, the nun tau, which is the active voice indicator, and then the os, masculine nominative singular case ending. Similarly with middle participles, we had for apon, that ape stem, which is the aorist stem from Lego, the second aorist. Since apon is a second aorist, there won't be a tense marker. We've already got stem change. The connecting vowel will be an omicron, and since we're going to make this a middle, we want to use the middle voice indicator men, and let's make this a dative masculine singular. So we want the O noun ending. And we end up then with apomeno. So let's look at the components of a first aorist passive participle. The verb stem is going to be the same, lu. That's just the aorist passive stem. And we're going to see a theta as a tense marker and an epsilon connecting vowel. That's going to look an awful lot like the theta eta that was typical of the aorist passive indicative verbs. We add to that the active voice indicators. Why the active voice indicators? Nun tau and the sigma-based voice indicator for the feminine. Well, because we are already marking the passive voice with the tense marker theta and the connecting vowel epsilon, and so we don't need to use the middle voice indicator or anything like that. And finally, we put on the same case endings that we've used in other kinds of participles. So for the genitive masculine singular, we would have luthentos, and for the genitive feminine singular of luo, aorist passive participle, we would have lutheses. Luthentos would mean something like being set free, and lutheses would mean something like being set free as well, but with a feminine subject. One thing to notice here is that the feminine voice indicator has changed from the present tense us and from the aorist active as to this eis, the epsilon connecting vowel combined with is, iota sigma. You still see the sigma there that's typical of the feminine voice indicator, but you just need to remember that since it's based on epsilon, it's going to be not s but eis in the feminine for aorist passive participles. Let's look at all the forms here. You can see first of all that every form has the theta connecting, tense marker. And that's going to be one of the first things to look for when you're asking whether this is an aorist passive participle. Does it have the theta tense marker? They all also use the epsilon connecting vowel. And there are only two forms in the singular that are irregular. Instead of something like the own ending or the sa ending that we get in the aorist active participle, Here we have, for the nominative masculine singular, luthes, and exactly the same thing in the vocative, luthes. This is another one of those irregular endings that you just have to learn, but this is a little bit easier because, if you notice, luthes, the ace ending, looks identical to the connecting vowel and voice indicator for feminine aorist passive participles. We have in the feminine luthes a, and if we just take off the alpha ending, we have the same as the nominative masculine singular, luthes. So that can be a fairly easy irregular form to remember. And again, remember that we're using all of the case endings the same way we would use them on third declension nouns in the masculine and neuter, and first declension nouns in the feminine. The feminine voice indicator, as I said before, can be a little bit tricky because it changes in each of the tenses. So we can actually figure out why it changes if we think of the voice indicator in each case as being S, epsilon sigma. The omicron connecting vowel of the present tense combines with the epsilon of the S to make an U diphthong, and so we get us. Luusa. I am being set free. That would be I am setting free. In the aorist active, we have the alpha connecting vowel, which is stronger than the epsilon in the S voice indicator, and so, as sometimes happens, when an alpha meets an epsilon, the epsilon just is absorbed by the alpha, which is stronger, and so we just get as in the aorist active, lusasa. And now with the aorist passive, we can see we have an epsilon connecting vowel meeting S, and so the combined form has an epsilon combining with an epsilon, which, as we've seen before with contract verbs, often produces an epsilon iota a diphthong. So that's why we have us in the present, as in the aorist active, and ace in the aorist passive for our feminine voice indicators. Here are some plural examples. Again, we have the same pattern with the theta tense marker in each case, and the epsilon connecting vowel, and our active voice indicators, nun tau in the masculine and neuter, and the is, or with the connecting vowel ace, in the feminine. The one thing to notice is the dative plural of the masculine and neuter. Here, as often happens in the dative, because the C ending, the sigma iota ending, comes in with the third declension endings, that causes some collapsing of the consonants, and effectively what happens is that the dative plural masculine and neuter forms end up looking like they're using the feminine voice indicator. They're not. It's just that the way the nun tau has collapsed in front of the sigma here has created an is that looks the same. But if that helps you to remember that in the dative masculine plural and neuter masculine and dative neuter plural, the connecting vowel and tense voice indicator and ending combine to make the AC and AC that sound a little bit like the ace in the feminine. If that helps you to remember the dative plurals, then that's great. And again, we have all of the completely regular third declension plural endings in the masculine and neuter, and the first declension plural endings for the feminine. Now, just like there was a first and second aorist in the active participles, so with the passive participles we still have some first aorists and some second aorists. And the pattern is going to be the same as we saw with first and second aorist passive indicative verbs. So grapho is one verb that becomes a second aorist in the aorist passive, as we saw. And as with the indicative verbs, the second aorist passive drops the tense marker, keeps the epsilon connecting vowel, and all of the other aspects here are the same. So if we compare graphentos here with the genitive masculine plural of the present tense, the only difference would be the connecting vowel. That would be an omicron in a present tense participle, present active participle. It would be graphontos. So the only way we can recognize that this is a second aorist passive participle and not a present active participle is the epsilon. This makes it very important to look for the connecting vowels. It's a little bit easier to recognize in the feminine genitive singular. Why? Because not only do we have that epsilon connecting vowel, but it's combined in this characteristic way with the S active voice marker, voice indicator, and we have that ace combination. So here is an example of all of the forms in the singular of the second aorist passive participle for grapho. And you can see that with the exception of the absent theta, this really all looks the same as we saw with first aorist passive participles, even down to the irregular ace in the masculine nominative singular and vocative singular. So really the only difference is that you're using the second aorist passive stem, the same one that you would use for regular second aorist passive verbs, and you don't have a theta. You don't have the tense marker. And as we've seen before, all of those case endings are perfectly regular. Here are the plurals. Not much more to say here. We have the same ace combination in the dative masculine plural and dative neuter plural. And totally regular third declension, first declension, and third declension noun endings. But what does the aorist passive participle mean? Well, there's really nothing new to learn here. The meaning of the aorist passive participle is really very much like the aorist active participles. Because we're in the aorist, we're dealing with the unmarked or undefined, as Mounce puts it, aspect. So we're looking at the action as a whole without putting any particular emphasis on any aspect of the action. And the only difference between the aorist active participle and the aorist passive participle is that we now are using a passive voice. So the subject is receiving the verb's action. Here are some examples. Haluthes would be the one who is loosed, or the one who is set free. Blephtentes would be by their being seen. Taking the participle there as an instrumental adverbial participle. Lechthesa would be something like after it was spoken, from Lego, and taking that as a temporal adverbial participle. You can learn more about the aorist passive participle in Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek, 3rd edition, and I provide the section number and page numbers for you here.